Before all of this, I was just James, a husband, a father, living a quiet, predictable life. Then, one ordinary day, everything I thought I knew about existence shattered in an emergency room waiting area. I collapsed, but what happened next wasn't darkness or fear. It was an awakening into a light I can barely describe, a profound joy, and a telepathic conversation that changed my entire understanding of life, death, and everything beyond. What if the end isn't an end at all, but just the beginning of a conversation you didn't even know you were having?
Before this profound shift, my worldview was neatly contained within the boundaries of what I could see, touch, and logically explain. I considered myself a secular Buddhist, someone who found solace in the present moment, yet held no firm convictions about what might lie beyond the veil of life. The concept of an individual consciousness enduring after the body's demise felt more like wishful thinking than a tangible reality. For most of my life, I was, and still am, James. I've always been a man of routine, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of suburban life. My days revolved around caring for my wonderful wife and son, both of whom depend on me for support. We lived in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, the kind where the biggest excitement might be a new flower blooming in the garden, or a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. My days often blended into one another, marked by familiar tasks, quiet moments of reflection, and the simple joys of family life. I wasn't an adrenaline junkie or a seeker of grand adventures. My happiness was rooted in stability and the well-being of those I loved. Looking back, my early life wasn't particularly dramatic. I grew up in a fairly typical household, with the usual childhood scrapes and triumphs. There wasn't one defining moment that shaped my entire being, but rather a collection of smaller experiences that slowly carved out the person I became. I remember long summer days spent exploring the woods behind our house, the smell of pine needles and damp earth filling the air. Those moments instilled in me a deep appreciation for nature, a quiet reverence for the intricate balance of the world. Then there were the inevitable bumps and bruises, the small heartbreaks and disappointments that taught me resilience. I learned early on the importance of self-reliance, of finding inner strength when external circumstances felt overwhelming. These weren't profound revelations, just the slow accumulation of life's lessons. Emotionally, I would describe myself as generally content, perhaps even a bit stoic. I wasn't prone to grand displays of emotion, preferring a more measured approach to life. There was a quiet satisfaction in providing for my family, in seeing my son grow, and sharing a comfortable silence with my wife. Yet beneath that steady surface, there might have been a subtle undercurrent of something less defined, perhaps a quiet yearning for a deeper understanding, a sense that there was more to existence than the daily grind. It wasn't a profound dissatisfaction, more like a faint echo of curiosity in the background, a question mark hanging silently in the air about the nature of reality and our place within it. My relationship with life and death, prior to what happened, was quite pragmatic. As a secular Buddhist, I embraced the impermanence of all things. I believed that consciousness, in a broad sense, might continue, but the idea of me, James, with my memories, my personality, my individual thoughts and feelings, persisting after death felt less likely. It was a comforting thought to imagine a cessation of suffering, a return to a peaceful void. Death was simply the inevitable end, a natural conclusion to the human experience. I approached it with a calm acceptance, devoid of fear, but also without any grand expectations of an afterlife. It was what it was, a fundamental part of the cycle. I found a certain peace in that acceptance, a grounding in the present moment, knowing that this life, this tangible reality, was all I could truly count on. That was my truth, until it wasn't.
That morning, there was a subtle, insidious betrayal within my own body, a sensation that something was profoundly wrong. even before the real alarm bells started to ring. It began as a dull ache, easily dismissed, but it escalated with an alarming speed, transforming a perfectly ordinary day into an unexpected and terrifying countdown to collapse. The day it all happened started just like any other ordinary Saturday, or so I thought. The gentle morning light filtered through the bedroom window, the familiar scent of brewing coffee wafted from the kitchen, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound. My wife was still asleep, and my son, too, was enjoying the late morning peace. I remember going to the bathroom, and that's when the first unsettling anomaly presented itself. It wasn't a sharp pain, not a sudden jolt, but a chilling realization. I was passing blood, a lot of it. At first, a wave of denial washed over me. This isn't happening. I tried to rationalize it, blame it on something I ate, a temporary glitch. But the alarming quantity, the persistent nature of it, quickly dispelled any illusions. Panic began to claw at the edges of my calm demeanor. My mind, usually so composed, started racing. What was this? How serious was it? My primary concern immediately shifted to my family. What would happen to them if something truly serious was wrong with me? This wasn't just about my health. It was about their security, their future. I knew I couldn't ignore it. With a deep breath, I woke my wife, trying to keep my voice steady, to avoid alarming her more than necessary. Her immediate concern was palpable, and together we made the decision, the emergency department. The drive to the hospital felt interminable, each mile stretching into an eternity. The world outside the car window seemed to blur, losing its usual vibrancy. My focus narrowed to the growing discomfort in my abdomen and the persistent sense of internal leakage, a draining sensation that was subtly but steadily weakening me. We arrived at the emergency room, a hushed anxieties and fluorescent lights. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken fears. The waiting room was predictably full. I tried to appear calm, to project an image of composure for my wife, but inside, a quiet alarm was growing louder. I sat down, trying to lean back, to conserve energy, but the world around me began to tilt. The faces of strangers in the waiting room seemed to blur, their voices fading into an indistinct hum. My body felt heavy, yet strangely detached. It was a peculiar sensation, like being weighed down by an invisible force, while simultaneously feeling my grip on reality slowly loosen. The lightheadedness intensified. It wasn't just dizziness, it was a profound sense of fading. My vision began to narrow, like a tunnel closing in, the edges of my awareness dimming. A cold sweat broke out, and my heart began to pound a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I knew instinctively that I couldn't stay seated. I had to get help, had to tell someone. The reception desk, only a few feet away, suddenly seemed an insurmountable distance. I pushed myself up, each movement an effort of sheer will, my legs feeling like lead, my head swimming. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to stretch and distort, radiating an unsettling halo. I took a few shaky steps, trying to call out to signal for attention, but my voice felt trapped in my throat, a mere whisper. The last thing I remember was reaching the counter, trying to articulate that I was about to pass out, and then a sudden, absolute blank. The floor rushed up to meet me, or perhaps I simply ceased to be aware of it. The world simply winked out.
In that fleeting moment between collapse and awakening, I was enveloped not by darkness, but by an extraordinary, pervasive light that imbued everything with an unimaginable joy. It was there, amidst this radiant presence, that I found myself concluding a profound, silent conversation with a being whose love for me felt utterly boundless, a love that transcended any earthly understanding. The world had just winked out. One moment the sterile, fluorescent-lit chaos of the emergency room waiting area, the next an absolute void. There was no pain, no fear, no sensation of falling or hitting the ground. It was an instant transition, a sudden, complete cessation of my physical reality. But this wasn't the darkness I had always imagined death to be. Instead, I awoke. And what I awoke to was not the ceiling of the waiting room, not the worried faces of paramedics, but an all-encompassing, luminous embrace. Everything was bathed in a light. I wish I could truly describe it, but words fail. It wasn't merely bright, it was infused with something else, something profoundly alive and benevolent. It permeated every atom of my surroundings, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. I could still perceive the faint outlines of what I knew to be my physical environment, the gurney I was on, the blurred figures of medical staff. But they were no longer just objects. They were shimmering, vibrating with this indescribable radiance. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been woven from pure, incandescent joy. In that moment, all the physical distress, the fear, the anxiety that had been building inside me just moments before, simply vanished. It wasn't just gone, it was as if it had never existed. I was filled with a happiness so profound, so absolute, that it dwarfed any joy I had ever experienced in my earthly life. It wasn't an emotion, but a state of being, a complete and utter contentment that resonated through every fiber of my consciousness. There was no room for fear, no space for worry. I was utterly, perfectly at peace. And then the conversation. It wasn't with a voice I heard with my ears, but a direct, telepathic exchange, a communication of pure thought and feeling. It felt like I was concluding a much longer dialogue, though I couldn't recall its beginning. There was a someone there, a distinct presence, an entity with whom I was deeply connected. I knew this being loved me totally, unconditionally, with a love so immense it was almost overwhelming. And I, in turn, loved this entity with an equal, pure intensity. It was a recognition, a reunion, as if we had always known each other, always been in this profound connection.
The clarity of my awareness in that moment was sharper than anything I'd ever known in my normal waking life. My thoughts were not just speeded up, they were crystalline, immediate, unburdened by the usual mental clutter. I was fully aware of my surroundings, yes, but also of my situation, and of this incredible, loving presence that enveloped me. It was in this state of heightened consciousness that a thought, clear and undeniable, formed within me. I would love to die right now. The profound happiness, the absolute absence of fear, the overwhelming sense of being loved, it was a state I never wanted to leave. It felt like coming home. But then another thought, equally clear, arose. My wife and son. They were dependent on me for care. They would suffer if I died now. It wasn't a sense of duty, not a burden, but a deep, resonant understanding of the love and responsibility I had for them. It was a conscious decision made with absolute clarity in that radiant space. I wanted to stay in this blissful state, but I also understood the profound implications of my absence on those I cherished most. And then the telepathic response from the loving presence, an assurance, gentle yet firm. This was not your time, the communication conveyed. You will return to caring for them for a long time. It wasn't a command, but a statement of fact, a loving guidance.
The certainty in their communication was absolute, and I accepted it without question. It was as if a preordained path was being revealed, and my role in it was clear. This exchange, this profound understanding, felt like the culmination of a much longer conversation, though the details of anything else we might have discussed eluded me. It was a deep, intuitive knowing that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The light persisted, bathing everything in its mystical glow for what felt like a minute or two, but the profound happiness, that overwhelming sense of peace and love, lingered for much longer, an hour or more, even as the immediate intensity of the light began to recede. What truly struck me, and what remains with me to this day, is the absolute certainty that my individual personality, the essence of who I am, would survive bodily death. Before this experience, I had believed that consciousness might persist in some nebulous, impersonal form, but not my distinct self. Now I knew. I had just engaged in a telepathic conversation with a distinct, loving entity, and I was still me, fully aware, fully present, fully capable of thought and emotion, even without a physical body. This wasn't a belief, it was a direct, undeniable experience. I also gained a non-specific awareness that I had existed before this life and would continue to exist after it. It wasn't a detailed memory of a past life, but an inherent knowing of my own eternal nature. The existence of continued consciousness after death was simply assumed, a fundamental truth that required no explanation. And the sheer, overwhelming, unconditional love that emanated from that presence and that I felt in return was the most powerful revelation of all. It was a love that felt like the very foundation of existence, a truth that transcended all earthly understanding. In that profound state, I felt a sense of harmony, a feeling of being no longer in conflict with nature. It wasn't a grand understanding of the universe's mechanics, but a deep, intrinsic peace with my place within it. There were no tunnels, no visual encounters with specific figures, no sensation of floating above my physical body in a traditional out-of-body experience. My experience was unique, deeply personal, and yet it contained the core elements of profound transformation that many NDE accounts speak of: the light, the overwhelming love, the telepathic communication, and the undeniable shift in understanding about the nature of existence and consciousness. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a moment of absolute clarity in the face of what should have been oblivion.
The shift back was jarring, like being abruptly pulled from a vivid, beautiful dream into a heavy, uncomfortable reality. One moment I was enveloped in pure, boundless love. The next, a crushing weight settled upon me, a profound weakness that felt entirely alien after the liberation I had just experienced. The return was not a gentle fading, not a soft landing. It was a jarring, almost violent snapback into the physical. One moment I was bathed in that indescribable light, immersed in absolute love and profound understanding, feeling lighter than air and completely without fear. The next, a profound sense of heaviness crashed down upon me. It was like being forced back into a lead suit after having soared weightless through the purest air. My body, which had felt so utterly irrelevant, suddenly asserted its presence with an undeniable force. I opened my eyes, or rather became aware of opening them, to find myself on a gurney. The sterile white ceiling of a hospital corridor scrolled past above me. I could hear the rhythmic squeak of wheels, the low murmur of voices. My vision was still slightly blurred, but the otherworldly light that had permeated everything was gone, replaced by the harsh, unfiltered gleam of fluorescent tubes. My immediate reaction wasn't fear, but a strange disappointment. A profound sense of loss washed over me. I had just been in a state of absolute bliss, a communion with something truly divine, and now I was back in this heavy, demanding body, in this noisy, complicated world. There was a fleeting moment of confusion, a struggle to reconcile the two realities. Had I dreamed it? Was it a hallucination brought on by whatever was wrong with me? But the vividness of the experience, the absolute certainty of it, pushed against those rationalizations. No dream had ever felt so undeniably real. Physically, I felt utterly drained. My limbs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive. An overwhelming weakness settled deep in my bones, a stark contrast to the lightness I had just known. I felt disoriented, my mind struggling to fully grasp where I was and what was happening. There was no pain initially, just this profound sense of exhaustion and a lingering nausea, a physical echo of the internal disruption. I realized I was being wheeled into a room, the sterile environment confirming I was very much back in the land of the living, or at least the land of the sick. I heard snippets of conversations around me, medical terms I barely registered, focusing instead on the feeling of my own consciousness slowly re-anchoring itself in this frail terrestrial vessel. I learned later that I had been unconscious for less than 2 minutes. To me, it felt like an eternity, an entire lifetime lived in a timeless space. My wife, who had been frantic with worry, was there, her face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The medical staff, oblivious to the profound journey I had just taken, were focused on my vital signs, discussing blood pressure and oxygen levels, which they told me were very low, but never critically so. They acknowledged I had passed out due to a serious intestinal hemorrhage, but they saw it as a physical event, an unfortunate incident. To them, I had simply fainted and recovered. My near death was, by their clinical definition, an exaggeration.
In those first few hours, as I lay in the ICU, receiving intravenous fluids and drugs to stabilize my blood pressure, I didn't share my experience. How could I? How do you explain an indescribable light, a telepathic conversation, and a love that transcends human comprehension to someone focused on IV drips and blood counts? The words felt inadequate, almost demeaning to the profundity of what I had witnessed. I tried to process it internally, to hold on to the echoes of that happiness and certainty, even as my physical body slowly began its arduous recovery. It took me about a year before I truly started to share the full extent of what I had experienced. The initial attempts were cautious, hesitant. The reaction from those I confided in was varied. Some listened with genuine curiosity, a few with a glimmer of understanding in their eyes. But for most, there was a palpable sense of disbelief or an attempt to rationalize it away. It was the shock, or your brain was starved of oxygen. There was no malice, simply an inability to grasp something so far outside their own lived reality. It was clear that this was my truth to hold, a secret garden of understanding that I could only selectively invite others into. The contrast between the unearthly truth I now carried and the mundane reality of daily life, where such things were often dismissed, was a constant, subtle source of disconnect. I was back, yes, but I was not the same James who had collapsed in that waiting room.
The journey through that extraordinary light didn't just alter my beliefs about what happens after death. It fundamentally recalibrated my appreciation for life itself, dissolving old anxieties and replacing them with an unwavering certainty that love persists beyond all earthly bounds. Now, the future, even my own mortality, holds a profound sense of anticipation, not dread. My world changed that day, not with a bang, but with an internal shift so profound it rippled through every aspect of my existence. Before, I was a man who planned, who worried about the future, who felt the subtle anxieties of responsibility. After, those anxieties didn't vanish entirely, but their grip loosened significantly. My priorities, once centered on the accumulation of comfort and security, expanded to embrace a deeper, more spiritual understanding of connection. The mundane still exists, of course, the bills, the chores, the daily routine of caring for my family, but they no longer consume my thoughts with the same intensity. I find I have less frustration about the demanding aspects of caring for my loved ones. It's not that the challenges disappear, but my internal response to them is different. There's a newfound patience, a deeper wellspring of compassion. I used to experience a fear of missing out, a FOMO, on various life experiences. That too has faded. I understand now that some experiences transcend the physical, and the most vital ones are internal. My entire worldview, particularly concerning life and death, underwent a complete overhaul. As a secular Buddhist, I had embraced the concept of impermanence, but with a lingering skepticism about individual personality surviving death. Now, that skepticism has been replaced with absolute certainty. I know, with an unshakable inner conviction, that my consciousness, my unique personality, continues beyond the physical body. This isn't a belief I adopted, it's a truth I experienced. I also gained a profound understanding that there are beings on the other side who care deeply for us, a love so pure and encompassing that love itself feels like a weak word for it. This knowledge has brought immense comfort, particularly concerning the death of loved ones. My daughter was murdered less than 2 months before my experience, and the grief had been immense, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Now, I know she is happy. My wife has felt her presence from time to time, and where I might have once dismissed it as wishful thinking, I am now certain she is right. Death for me is no longer a tragedy, but a transition. I now genuinely look forward to my own death, not because I wish to shorten my life or abandon my responsibilities, but because I anticipate that reunion with the profound love and peace I experienced. This acceptance has paradoxically allowed me to live more fully in the present, unburdened by the fear of what comes next.
This experience didn't give me a grand new mission or a specific career path. I didn't suddenly become a spiritual guru or abandon my life to travel the world. My mission, if you can call it that, became a quiet integration of this profound truth into my everyday existence. It's about living with more compassion, with less anxiety in general. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, even when the world around me seems fragmented. My purpose remains caring for my family, but I do so with a deeper well of love and a newfound serenity. There's a subtle urge to share my story, as I'm doing now, hoping that perhaps my words might offer a glimmer of hope or a different perspective to others grappling with loss or the fear of death. Integrating such an extraordinary experience into ordinary life hasn't been without its challenges. The biggest one is the ineffability of it all. How do you describe an indescribable light or a happiness that has no earthly equivalent? The words fall short, frustratingly inadequate. It's like trying to explain the color blue to someone who has only ever seen in black and white. This often leads to a sense of isolation, a knowledge that I carry that most people cannot truly grasp. I've learned to be selective about with whom I share the full details, understanding that not everyone is ready or able to comprehend such an account. There's also the constant pull between the blissful memory of the other side and the demands of physical existence. Sometimes the mundane can feel heavier, duller in comparison, but this is tempered by the profound peace that underpins everything now. So, what is the ultimate lesson from all of this? It is not a secret doctrine or a complex philosophy. It is, quite simply, that love is the fundamental truth of existence. It is the force that binds us, sustains us, and awaits us beyond the veil of physical life. My experience showed me that our individual consciousness, our personality, is not extinguished with the body, but continues, eternally connected to a boundless source of love and wisdom. Death is not an ending, but merely a transition to another state of being, a joyous homecoming. To anyone watching, to anyone who carries grief, fear, or uncertainty about what lies beyond, understand that the universe is far more benevolent, far more loving than we can possibly imagine in our earthly confines. There's a profound purpose to our lives, even if we don't always perceive it. And when our time here is done, we are met not by darkness, but by an overwhelming light and an unconditional love that has been waiting for us all along. Embrace your life, cherish your connections, and know that you are loved profoundly and eternally. The greatest journey truly begins when you least expect it.